you could have a game where both teams are really good, both teams are really bad, one team's really good and the other's not, or vice versa, and think about what that means to you. Now, this is out of your control entirely, so you can't be like, oh, we got a bad team, GG. Hey guys, just a quick reminder that I do have a Valorant competitive fundamentals course, which will help you understand all the fundamental aspects of competitive that will help you climb, understand the game at a deeper level, and ultimately rank up and improve your overall mechanical skill. Thanks for watching, guys. See you in the next one. Alright guys, so in today's video, I'm going to be giving you some reasons why you're likely not consistent in Valorant. And by not consistent, what I mean specifically is some games you perform extremely well, and some games you perform like the exact opposite, and you perform very bad. Now, this is especially common for duelist players because you'll have games, and really what causes this is differing circumstances. So, for example, your team might mesh together really well, and so you're going to do extra good because your team has good comms, you know, your team's backing up with a good mentality. But some games your team might not be as good, and then the enemies might also be harder. Some games your team might be really good and the enemy team might be really bad. And so of course you're going to perform better in those games, and these games happen from like silver all the way up to high ranks. So this is something you need to adapt to. Just because you have bad teammates and the enemies are like really good doesn't mean that you can't, you know, frag a lot, or that you can't have a really good game still, right? So that's what I'm going to be jumping into, and the first tip is going to be very basic. This is something I said yesterday in my video as well. It's that you need to be training your aim or your mechanics somehow consistently. Now, mechanics, I'm going to actually change this tip just a little bit. It doesn't just mean aim or movement or peeking. Those things are all included in mechanics. But for example, if we play Raze, we might want to learn how to use our blast pack and double satchel. I suck, apparently. Right? So we might want to learn how to double satchel. We might want to learn how to, you know, use this ability a little bit better. You know, how do we jump around a corner and kind of use like this? Or how do we double satchel from high ground? How do we double satchel for height? How do we double satchel for range? Or, you know, how do you use different abilities? How do you know, can you practice updraft and knives with jet? Stuff like that. Those are all mechanics. Now, the main things you really want to practice here for consistency is going to be your aim and peeking styles, which also ties a little bit into movement. So, yeah, but how would you do this? I would highly recommend counter-strafing, or I mean, not counter-strafing. I'd recommend aim trainers or deathmatch, and this is exactly what I said in yesterday's video. I'm not trying to be repetitive. This is just really important, right? Like, if you want to get better, it's very important that you don't queue right into comp every day, and that you're consistent, right? If you're not consistent in your aim training or in your deathmatching, then you're not going to be consistent in your comp games. It's really quite that simple. If you do play for long enough, you'll become more consistent, but by playing deathmatch and aim labs or Kovacs, whatever aim trainer, you're making that process much quicker. You exponentially improve quicker, right? It's not like you need to be doing this for years. You only need to be doing this probably for like a week or so, and you're going to notice some significant improvements for sure. So let's go ahead and move on to the next tip. I think you guys will find the next tips very insightful. So for the next tip, something that keeps you relatively inconsistent is whenever you repeatedly do the same thing over and over again, and especially when you do this on autopilot. Now, this can rear in many ways. The first way that comes to my mind whenever we talk about doing the same thing over and over again is where you push, not only as an individual in a competitive game, but also just as a team. So are you pushing the same side? Are you pushing A every round? Are you pushing B every round? Have you turned your brain off and you're doing this automatically? Have you stopped putting any thought into where you're going? So you're just going A, you're just going B with no thought behind it, or are you just following your team and they're not saying anything either, so you're just automatically going there? And this is a problem, right? We need to turn our brain back on at least a little bit. We don't need to coordinate our whole team every time. But it's very useful to be like, okay, I'm going to walk up cat, or I'm going to go mid, or I'm going to go somewhere else. I'm going to do something that I haven't done yet that the enemies aren't going to expect. Especially if you do something that just sounds so ridiculous and so dumb, potentially. It's actually going to work because enemies just won't expect it. They're going to expect you to keep doing the same thing you've been doing the whole game. And so another way that this can rear, another way that this can show itself is, for example, if you're playing Raze or you're playing Jet, you continue to use these characters in the same way, and you don't open your mind to new ways you can possibly use them, but also their abilities. So, for example, how do I get down here without dying? Good job. Alright, so one way that you can use Raze Satchel that you might not currently be using it, I like to use this a lot. I'm not great with double satchels as we saw a second ago, but one way that I like to peek with Raze Satchels is like this. Because it gives you a nice little boost. It's not the best example. Like, let's say we know that there's someone here, We could wide swing, or we could just throw a satchel like this. And this is not something that people are going to expect in lower ranks, right? This is something that you probably don't currently do a lot, is raise, if you do play raise. And this is something you can do as raise that will give you an upper hand against your opponents, right? And so similarly on other characters, if you're not a duelist or if you don't play raise, you can practice their abilities, or you can like tweak your playstyle just a little bit, that really, so that you really become more unexpected, and you're going to become more consistent, surprisingly. If you actually have, if you have multiple playstyles, you can swap to seamlessly, right? Instead of just having one playstyle or just doing one thing repeatedly that, is predictable and doesn't always work. So, basically what I'm telling you is, if something's not working, if you're having a bad game, swap it up, do something different, not only with your abilities, but also with where you push, with how you approach your teammates, with, whatever you do. And that's going to be extremely useful for you. And the last thing I'll talk about with this tip is that you can also swap up how you warm up. You can swap up how long you warm up. You can swap up, how many deathmatch uses you play, how long you play aim lab. And you can swap up the different types of tasks you do and warm up. You can swap up what you focus on in deathmatch, for example. So you can focus on peeking one day, and the next day you can focus on movement or counter strafing or just crosshair placement. And then if you're doing aim lab, you can focus on tracking, flicking, speed on all different days. And again, this is going to swap up your approach, and this is going to make you an overall more consistent player. I think this is an extremely valuable tip, and hopefully you guys benefit from it. Moving back to what I initially said at the start of this video, is that every team is different in every game, and that includes both your team but also the enemy team. Every single player and how they mesh is completely different. Just think about that for a second. Think about all the possible combinations. Think about how many people play this game in your rank, and think about how many possible combinations there are for enemy teams and for your team with you, right? And think how you could have a game where both teams are really good, both teams are really bad, one team's really good and the other's not, or vice versa. And think about what that means to you. Now, this is out of your control entirely, so you can't be like, oh, we got a bad team, GG. That's not the correct approach. But an approach that you can take is understanding and trying consciously to find ways to make use of what you have with your team and how to exploit the enemy team, right? So hopefully this makes sense, but basically every game you play, there's going to be a way that you can pick apart the enemies, and there's going to be some weak link. There's going to be a weakness where, like, whether it's, 4 players on their team are really good and there's just one person you can pick every round to get that free kill and to get that momentum, or whether it's like one site that the enemies have a hard time holding, or one area that they have a hard time holding. That's something that you can exploit. And again, this requires you to think outside the box, to get out of your comfort zone, and to go and really try to experiment and find where that is. And so this also applies on your team. You have to think about, what is my weak link? What does my team struggle with? Who's feeding? And how can I help them without getting mad or tilting at them verbally, right? And so, for example, let's say you have an 0-7 player, and they keep doing the same thing every round. You can say, like, yo, 0-7 player, can you come over here? Don't say that. Okay, don't say that. Say, like, yo, Omen, can you come over here and smoke for us? And then, or, yo, Omen, can you come up here and flash? And so by doing that, you're at least making use of their abilities instead of just them dying and doing nothing or whatever they're doing. And if your whole team is kind of bad that game, the enemy team is pretty good overall, or at least better than your team, you can try to coordinate your team a little bit so that, you can semi-bait them without telling them that you're going to bait them. That's one way that you can make use of this, especially if you're having a good game. You can be like, yo guys, can we run out A? And then I'm going to ult behind you guys or something like that. And then you can just, you can farm the enemy team that way. But a really important part is just identifying which parts of the enemy team are the weak link, and figuring out and identifying where and how you can exploit or take advantage of where their weaknesses are. And whenever you kill someone, it becomes a 5v4, assuming none of your teammates die. And that's going to open up, that's going to give your team confidence, that's going to apply pressure, that's going to give you some momentum as a team. And even if it's like an 0-7 enemy player, it's still going to give you momentum. It also gives you an ult charge. And from there, that, like, so let's see you kill someone A on a map, that's going to pull rotates from the enemy team from B. And so that means if you're smart, you'd be like, guys, let's go B, let's go B, let's go B. Because you know that they're going to rotate. And so again, this is all through experience. This is all through practice. This is all through trial and error. If you never ask to rotate from after getting that kill, you're never going to, you're never going to learn. right? And so that ties in with my other tip as well. I think this is one of the most important tips. Honestly, you have to realize that some games you're going to accidentally do really well, and some games you're going to, no matter what you do, you're going to perform really, really bad. And in those games, you have to think, what could I be doing a little different here? How could I tweak my gameplay or my playstyle so that I can at least be a little more useful, or I can find a weakness in their team or in their playstyle, right? And this tip is to not be scared of making a mistake, or don't fear making mistakes, because it is through mistakes that we actually learn the most. And if you never put yourself in a situation where you can make a mistake or where something goes wrong, you're not going to be learning as quickly, and you're still going to remain inconsistent for longer. Whereas, let's say that you're putting yourself in a position where it's kind of high risk, high reward, but it either works or it doesn't. If it doesn't work, you're going to learn and you're going to adapt quicker than if you never put yourself in that position. Because if you don't put yourself in that position, you're going to be in the same lane, or the same, patterns of behavior of how you play the game, and so you're not going to adapt as quickly. Whereas a person that is consistently trying new things, now don't take what I'm telling you out of context. You don't want to be doing like retarded stuff every single round. Excuse my language. You don't want to be doing crazy stuff every single round, because there is some element of, you need to be playing smart, but there is also an element of, in certain situations, where you can kind of think outside the box and be a little creative. Be a little creative with how you position, with where you play, and with your comms and stuff like that. And it's through doing stuff like that, whenever you make a play that actually works, you learn a lot as well. Not just whenever you fail, but failing is a part, making mistakes is a part of being a human, and making mistakes is a big part of becoming better at Valorant. So you cannot fear making mistakes, and especially at low ranks, like I talked about yesterday. If you're in silver or gold, you're in the middle of the bell curve, you're completely average, and so you have to understand you're gonna make mistakes. Even if you're high rank, you're gonna make mistakes. So you might as well bite the bullet and put yourself in positions where you're either we're gonna learn something one way or another. You're gonna learn something through a mistake, or you're gonna learn something through doing something great. Now, how can we do this? I would highly recommend, again, using comms. If you can use comms to coordinate something like that, like let's say that it's like a 2v2 and you're playing split on B site. I don't know if you guys know the high-low position. You could play that back site, and that's going to be really useful, because that's something that especially people in lower ranks do not expect. Now, let's say you get Raisinated and you guys both die. Now, that's something you might take into consideration next time, right? If the Raise has ult, or if the Raise has a nade, you might think twice before asking your teammate to group with you. And this is something that you learn, and you might otherwise not have thought about that if you didn't, try that and then fail. So, and this obviously applies to all sorts of situations all throughout Valorant that might occur in any game ever. So you just have to put yourself out there and be willing to fail. That's the gist of this. And by failing and by learning from your mistakes, from your failures, from your successes, you're going to become a more consistent player. So hopefully this makes sense. So my last tip for you is going to be identify your weaknesses. And this might sound kind of similar to my other tip, but it's subtly different, and you're going to notice that here. So identify what your specific weaknesses are, and this is also something I've talked about in previous videos, but make sure that you're aware of what your weaknesses are, because if you're not aware of what your weaknesses are, then you're inevitably going to be inconsistent. For example, being bad on attack is a very broad thing. So what specifically might you be bad at on attack? Now, you might be a very good defense player, or at least in your current rank, in your current situation, which is completely good. But why do you struggle on attack? Identifying that as a weakness, and then being a little more specific, like, okay, I'm not very good at getting picks on attack, or what do I do post plant on attack? I don't know, right? Which is typically not a problem, because post plant is kind of just turns into defense, so it typically becomes easier for most people. The main problem on attack for most people is getting that initial pick, or knowing where to start, or what to do, or how far to go up, or what angles to hold. Stuff like that. What abilities to use? Do you play contact? Do you even know what contact is? Now, that's just one example of a weakness you might have. A weakness could be anything. It could be anything from not being good on attack to having bad aim, or not peeking well, or not having good movement, not counter strafing properly, not using abilities properly, not calming properly. Any of these things, there's anything. There's a wide variety of problems or weaknesses that you might have, and it's worth noting that any one of these weaknesses can be it on like a spectrum. So for example, you might be really, really bad at comms, or you might be just a little bit bad at comms. Like you have some good comms, but you could be comming a little bit more, or you know, you could have really bad aim and it's holding you back severely, and everything else is, you know, semi better, or you could have just, you know, pretty okay aim that's, you know, that you can improve, but it's not like detrimental to your rank, and so, like, it's not holding you back that hard. And so yeah, identifying these. And if you don't know what these are, again, you can get coaching with me. You can DM me on Discord. We'll talk about that. But you can also get coaching with other people that, you know, might be your friends or something that are just higher ranks. And that can be another way you can help identify your weaknesses. You can also VOD review your own gameplay. You can look at videos of higher ranked players that, you know, might be telling you something, and then something resonates with you. Like, oh yeah, I do that, and that's something that holds me back, right? And so, yeah. Anyways, guys, if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.